Rabbi, let me ask you my first question. You are a traditional Jew. You're Jewish. How can you be against the state of Israel?
Yeah. So again, I pray to the Almighty to bestow upon me His truth, His wisdom, that I may be worthy of conveying His message and so sanctify His name and bring peace to the world. Amen. Assalamu alaikum. Well, because we are Jewish, we are opposed expressly and entirely and fully opposed to both the ideology of Zionism, which is the essence of what the development and the creation of the state is based on. It's based on Zionism, and we are against the creation of the state of Israel, the Zionist state of Israel. We are totally opposed to it. It's when I say we, I don't mean we as individuals. We, because we are true to our Torah, because we are practicing Jews, the Torah, the laws of the Almighty, is opposed to the existence of the state and opposed to this ideology of Zionism. It is contradictory to the Jewish religion, the ideology of Zionism, and the development, the creation of the state of Israel. Now, with God's help, I'll explain that. Well, Judaism is a religion of 3,000 years. That means we've been made a covenant 3,000 years ago. The Jewish people, the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, we made a covenant on Mount Sinai to uphold the laws of the Torah. God gave to Moses on Mount Sinai the Torah, and we accepted it upon us to be subservient to God and follow, adhere exactingly, strictly the laws of this covenant, which is the Torah. Zionism is a movement that started 150 years ago or something like that, and it is a transformation to a base nationalism, a material concept of having a piece of land, and it's totally excludes God from the equation. That means God does not play a part in this. They proudly announce they're a democracy, the state of Israel. That means you can do what you want. You're not bound by the laws of God. They're proudly announcing they're a democracy. At the same time, they have their flag is the Star of David. David, who wrote the Psalms, who was totally subservient to God, and what Judaism meant. He was the king of the Jewish people, to be subservient to God. He carried the Torah with him constantly. It is a totally contradictory concept of what their ersatz Judaism, this new Judaism, what they call Judaism, which is a nationalism. It's contradictory.
Is there like a book, sort of like, do they have their own Torah, so to speak?
No, that's what's so unfortunate. They have the law systems, which is also that in and of itself is blasphemy, because a Jewish person, for instance, if they have any conflict or dispute or whatever it may be, a Jewish people are required, according to this covenant that we made to God, we must get it adjudicated by going to a rabbinical court that goes according to the Torah, the laws of the Torah, to see what how to get the dispute settled. So it has to be according to the wisdom of the Torah of God gave us. Now, if to go out of that system, to use another law system, is considered blasphemy, because in other words, you're making as if God's wisdom, God's Torah, is secondary, is not as great as the system that you're going to. So it's considered blasphemy. It's totally forbidden according to the Jewish law for a Jewish person, two Jewish people who have a dispute. Obviously, if you're living in the United States or wherever it may be, if a Jewish person, God forbid, has a dispute with a non-Jew, they go to the court system. I mean, unless the person wants arbitration, then you could go, to anybody to arbitrate. It could be a rabbinical court, it could be anybody. But and of course, we don't we don't take the non-Jew into the Jewish court if he doesn't. Again, only wants arbitration, but he does not require. He goes to the American court system. But two Jews, if they're both American citizens and they have a dispute, God forbid, they must go to a rabbinical That's the law. According to the Jewish law, they must go to a rabbinical court to be adjudicated. If not, it's considered blasphemy. And the United States accepts this because they accept arbitration. In other words, if they both sign under that they're accepting the rule of the court, it's totally legal. But that's the way. So I mean, the Zionism, unfortunately, they didn't say that. They made a rabbinate. They hired rabbis. They made a rabbinate, and they have a chief rabbis, Sephardic, Ashkenazic. That means representing different communities. But it's all a farce. It's just a facade to legitimize their illegal state of Israel, which the whole thing is a falsification of Judaism. It's like I say, it's a ersatz Judaism. It's a supposed Judaism. They're using the symbols of Judaism, the Star of David, the name Israel, which is Jacob, the children of Israel that it says in the Bible. But it's totally falsifying and corrupting what Judaism is. Judaism is clearly.
Zionism is not an atheist movement. Like, you can be a Jew and you can be a Zionist, but Zionism means that you would then have to adhere to secular laws that were not created by God, but created by man.
Right. And so like Zionism, as I say, it's a purely nationalist movement. They want a state, they want a homeland, and they try to incorporate to infuse to the Jewish religion as a base to legitimize this creation, this state. But it's totally not acceptable because we'll go into step by step. First of all, again, Judaism is subservience to God to follow the laws of the Torah. Part of that is that the Almighty commanded us when He gave us the Torah that we should go into the Holy Land at the time, because it was on Mount Sinai that took place, that we accepted this covenant with God, the Torah, and we were required to go into the Holy Land. But God stipulated many times in the Torah that it's a holy land and it's holy, and therefore we have to be on a very high level of spirituality. If we will not be on that level of spirituality, then we will be sent out of the land. And many prophets came in, through the years who led the Jewish people, and they warned the Jewish people. Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Isaiah, it's all written, everybody can read it. And they warned the Jews many times that they're not on that proper level. Therefore, they will be driven from the land. And that eventually culminated and happened with the destruction of the temple. King Solomon built a temple. It was destroyed. There was a second one, and it was built and it was again destroyed. So 2,000 years ago, the Jews were driven out of the Holy Land as a nation. They were driven out by the Romans. They came back, then they were driven out by the Greeks. So the Jews were spread out around the world. And we were clear as a Jew, any Jew who's believing in God knew that the reason we were driven out of the land was purely because of our sins, not because we were incompetent physically, that we didn't have enough of a strong army. That was never an issue. When the Jews went into, God commanded the Jews to go into the Holy Land at the time of Moses 3,000 years ago. That was 1,000 years prior to being driven out of the land. The Jews were led that Moses was not permitted to go into the Holy Land by God, and so his student Joshua, whatever you would say, was the ones who took the Jews into the Holy Land, and God commanded them that they should go into Jericho, Jericho, and they were told to go 7 times, walk around the walls, and the walls sunk in. So it was all led by God. It was the will of the Almighty they should go in. It was miracles. It had nothing to do with physical prowess, never. And our history is constantly like that. It had nothing to do with physical prowess. It's the words of the Almighty. The words of the Almighty was that when we were not worthy anymore of that high level of spirituality, we were driven from the land with the destruction of the temple, and we were, since then, this is 2,000 years ago, that's a long time, we are forbidden to attempt to reestablish any Jewish sovereignty. We are in exile. We believe we are in exile which is decreed by the Almighty. The Almighty rules the world. We cannot try to fight the hands of God. It's not possible. So the Almighty sent us into exile, and we were sent into exile. We say in our prayers, every Jewish person who believes in God and prays says, because of our sins, we were driven into exile. We yearn and pray. Every Jewish person who's religious, we yearn and pray constantly. We want to return to the Holy Land, because the purpose of our lives is to glorify God, to live a life of holiness, to bring glory and respect to God. That is the purpose of living. That is what we believe we ought to do good deeds and to do so forth, that we should be, and that's the purpose of a Jewish person. Eventually, but the pinnacle of that glorification of God is when God will reveal his glory throughout the world. All humanity will recognize this one God. Then God will take us back, gather us in, and God will build the temple. It will be without any human intervention. In other words, there will be a metaphysical change in the world, a miraculous change. They will stop being atheists, and everybody will come and serve God, and God will build the temple. All the nations will gather.
Let me ask you this. So this information that you just shared with me, that 2,000 years ago, Jewish people were forced out of the Holy Land, is that coming from the Torah? Like, what is the source of that information that that makes you say that it was because of this?
It says it in the prophets. I mean, it says in Jeremiah, it says it in all the prophets about them. It says in the Psalms, and all the prophets talk about them. It's part of our history. You can go to Rome and you'll see the Arch of Titus. It's called. You see how the Jews were being led in chains out of the land. This is a part of history. We're not talking about some single person comes and tells a story. All our history was witnessed. For instance, the accepting of the Torah was over 1 million people were in the time they left Egypt. There was 600,000 males counted from the age of 20 to 60, and their children, their wives, their elders. So there was over 1 million. It has to be, and they were there standing in all heard how God said to them, I'm your God, and they accepted the Torah. And then there was never a gap in history. So the time came, Moses passed on, Joshua took over, he took them into the Holy Land, and so on through the generations. And then King David wanted to build the temple. He wrote the Psalms. His son, King Solomon, built the temple, and there was instruction. All of this is written in the prophets, and it's there for anybody to read and to see, and nobody refuted this.
So are you saying that you're saying that some point in the future, God will construct the temple? Is that related to the sort of the coming of the Messiah?
Yes, exactly. So yes, now remember, we as a Jewish people have our belief system, and we believe that, and we yearn and we pray. We believe in God, and we believe and it says in the prophets, God tells us there will come a day that He will accept us back as a nation, and we will be taken back He will embrace us again, and we will be taken from out where we are spread throughout the world, and we will return, and then God will build the temple. But at that time, I have to stress, this was never deemed as a threat to the Muslim communities that took the Jews in while we were suffering in crusades, inquisitions in Europe hundreds of years ago, and the Jews were embraced by the Muslim communities. We were taken in, even though they were scholars and they know our Torah is an open book. Anybody can read it. I mean, it's been translated into all the different languages. So it's clear the Muslim scholars knew that we yearn and we hope one day to return, but it was never considered a threat, because our belief is that we're not to take a gun and force our way back into the Holy Land. It will be, as I said, a miraculous change where all atheists will stop being atheists. The world will recognize one God. If you go to the United Nations, right across from the United Nations, there's a very big wall. It's called the Isaiah Wall. It's a concave wall. It's a half-round wall, and etched into the wall in big letters, a few stories high, is the verse. It says, there will come a time that the wolf and the sheep will rest together, and they will beat the swords into plowshares. The nation will not bear arms, will not call war on any nation anymore. So there's a time, and as it says in Isaiah, there will come a time where there'll be peace on the world. The sheep and the wolf will rest together. So that's a metaphysical change. That's a miraculous change, and the sheep and the wolf will rest together. But we believe in that, and it says that at that time the nations. All the nations, they will make one bond and all come to serve God. That time we believe God will build the temple. So that means not that everybody will become Jewish.
All the believing Jewish people currently living in Israel, how can they be living in Israel when their own book tells them not to make Israel their country?
Very good. Yeah. So let me explain that. So first, let me finish this thought. So it's not that we believe at the end of time, not that everybody will become Jewish. It will be that everybody will recognize God and serve God in harmony. If somebody wants to become Jewish, anybody could become Jewish contrary to what people believe. But we're not. That's not the issue. The issue is that we recognition of God, and we will all serve God, and God will build the temple. Now, that is the belief and the yearning of every Jewish person. So it's programmed into us. We pray for this. We hope for this, because the pinnacle of serving God of this hour, the purpose of our lives is to bring, as I mentioned, to bring glory to God, and that the pinnacle of that will be when there will be the revelation of God, and the returning, and God being building the temple. So that will happen. Now, but till that day comes, we are, since 2,000 years ago, we were driven into exile. And we were put under 3 oaths by God. Now, King Solomon, who built the temple, wrote a book called Song of Songs, Shir Hashirim, where he writes these prophecies, because a lot of our commands are built on prophecies. And he wrote that there's a 3 oaths of exile, that when we're going to be sent into exile, because he was before we were sent. He was when he built the temple. It wasn't in his lifetime that the temple was destroyed, but he wrote a prophecy from God, and he said that when you will be sent into exile, you are under oath. Do not attempt to return en masse, in large numbers, to the Holy Land. Do not attempt to return, because you're spread out by God. Secondly, don't rebel against any nation. We have to be loyal citizens in every country we reside. And thirdly, do not make any attempt to end the exile. So we're on the strict oath of God since 2,000 years ago. So although we suffer, we have the Inquisition, we went through crusades, and so much more suffering of blood libels, and I can go through our history. The 2,000 years is really millions of Jews were murdered through the ages, and suffered and were tortured, and we were not given proper citizenship and lands. We were not even in Europe. Till recently, the Jews were not allowed to buy land, be owners of land. I mean, it's just unbelievable what Jews went through. So still in all, we never tried to buy a piece of land anywhere and reestablish a Jewish state, because we know we're in exile by God. God is almighty, God is compassionate, and God commanded us, just like he commanded us to keep the Sabbath, like he commanded us to do every other thing that we do as Jews. We're not permitted to attempt to make a Jewish sovereignty. That was respected by the Jews who are true to God. And there was no other type of Judaism. Judaism was the covenant of the Torah. Now, 300 years ago or so, a movement started called Reform Judaism, in more than 300 years around. And they came along and they said, we're going to reform the religion. Oh, you can pick and choose and do what you want. You don't have to keep kosher. You don't have to keep the 10 commandments. You don't have to keep Sabbath. So they're reforming the religion, which is, by us, it's the most ridiculous, nonsensical thing, because God gave us the Torah, and God, it's God's Torah. It's not that we can create. It's like it's not a set of rules, a constitution that was made by human beings that you can make amendments or something. It's godly. So we never accept reform as a legitimate representation of Judaism. So although they call themselves Reform Jews, and today the majority of Jews are not Orthodox, meaning that they feel that they're practicing Jewish religion, or that's acceptable, although they're not following the laws of the Torah. We say that's totally false. There's no such thing outside of the laws of the Torah, which is called orthodoxy, Orthodox Judaism. But there is these majority of Jews today in the United States who are Reform Jews. They ordain their rabbis, their ministers. They go have their temples and all. By us, it's just a farce. You can call it Buddhism or call it anything you want. It's not Judaism. Anyway, but that's the story. But from that, that happened in Europe. This movement was created in Austria, Vienna, that's where it started, this movement of reform. It was like 100 years prior to Zionism. And then their concept was to assimilate, that the Jewish people should find them a home. They should be more accepted in Europe. And therefore they felt they'll assimilate. So they cut off their beards, their payas, we call this, and they started dressing like the non-Jews. They even their prayers were made to mimic the church.
Did they have their own book, or they reinterpreted the?
They didn't have their own book. They started making their laws, picking and choosing what they wanted from the Torah. But they never said, and like they said, many of them said that the Torah was given by Moses, not by God, and therefore, so they took parts of it and the rest of it they simply misconstrued. They twisted it and they said it means other things. But that's the way they started the thing. But it was totally just dismissed by all the rabbinical authorities in Europe. In fact, they even issued a fatwa. The leading rabbis in Europe, like 200 of the leading greatest rabbis in Europe, that were not even permitted as a Jew to go into their temples. So it's considered haram. It's considered unacceptable. Jews are not allowed to go into a church, because there's the deities. They have, the belief in statues, and Jesus, and they have all these things. So we're forbidden to go into church. In a mosque, which they pray to God, is a different story. We can go in, but not into a church. The same thing is with the rabbis issued a fatwa. We cannot go into Reform temples. We are totally disassociating ourselves from this reform movement. It's not Judaism. Now, but these people made the movement, and it became very popular, even till today. Many people felt that it was it drew a lot of people because it was very convenient, and they ordained people. They made it look like it's legitimate. They ordained rabbis and this and that, and unfortunately the works of Satan. It was today, as I say, the majority of Jews are non-religious, and they consider themselves practicing some type of religion, Judaism, which they call reform. And then the reform, some people said they went too far off the deep end. They went so far away from Judaism that other people decided to make conservative. They'll be more conservative. So maybe you heard this, the conservative movement amongst Jews. Again, but it's totally by us. All it is a farce, a joke. As long as it's not you're not an Orthodox Jew, you're not practicing the religion. We have one religion. That's what God gave to us. But anyway, for 100 years or so, this went on in Europe. So they became ignorant of the laws, that grandchildren didn't even study the Torah. They just studied some stories, whatever they liked, and they're totally ignorant of the Torah. So then they came along and they decided that grandchildren and others, they said, you know what? This is not actually working. There's still anti-Semitism in Europe and so forth. So they decided a movement started called Zionism, which they said, instead of assimilating, they're going to make their own country, their own homeland, and that way they'll be safe. So the movement started by Theodor Herzl and others of this movement to make a nationalism out of Judaism. Now, it's just, both of these are unacceptable. Not the assimilation angle, reform, or not the nationalism, but was it totally like turning 180 degrees? These reform.
People are the ones who founded the Zionist movement. Were they believing Jews? Were they atheists?
As a general rule, they were non-practicing Jews. They were some atheists, some totally just not practicing. They didn't respect the Torah. They didn't respect the rabbis. I carry around, one of the pictures I carry around is the David Ben-Gurion, who was the first prime minister, reading the Declaration of Independence in Independence Hall in 1948, when they made the State of Israel. Here's the picture of Theodor Herzl, who was prior to his time. Mm-hmm. And although it looks like he has a beard, but it's not a religious beard at all. He's not covering his head. And here you see them sitting and this historical moment reading the Declaration of Independence. Now, but if you'll see on the dais, They're supposedly making a Jewish state. Yeah, they have the Stars of David on the wall, and they're making a Jewish state. Yet they didn't. You don't see any rabbis here. You don't see people. You don't even see nobody with beards. Nobody who's practicing the religion. I don't. It's maybe some one or two of them are covering their heads, but you don't see that they're covering their heads. Every Jew is required to cover their head constantly, a man, because to show that we believe it's called Yarmulke, Yorei Malka, that we fear God, that it's a king above us, and it's a requirement according to the Jewish law to cover one's head. Here they're making this historical moment, momentous occasion, the declaration of a Jewish state. And they don't even have rabbis at the dais. They don't have. So in other words, you see the duplicity. You see the total contradiction that it's not a Jewish state. It's an ersatz Judaism. It's a new type of movement. It's a nationalist movement. Nothing with God. And of course,
Rabbi, let me ask you this. You just said a few moments ago that because even after they tried assimilating, that did not work. There was still a lot of anti-Semitism, because of which that gave birth to the Zionist movement, meaning that Jews were like, we need our own country to be safe. What's wrong with that? Like Jewish people have been persecuted, we both agree, for centuries. So why can't Jewish people have their own country where they can be safe from persecution, especially after like Holocaust, where like 6 million, according to some estimates, Jews were killed?
The question is a very good question. And if it would be any other nation, then it must probably be a very logical and a very good thing to do. But for Jewish people, Judaism is a religion. A religion is a covenant that we made with God, that we're subservient to God, and we cannot oppose the decrees of God. And God said to the Jewish people, I've put you into exile because a person who is wandering, he becomes humbled. He loses his haughtiness. He doesn't feel, that he's some great person. And God said, I want you to be dispersed amongst the nations, and you are forbidden to re-establish any Jewish sovereignty. Does that mean God let us hang, just without any protection? No, we believe that it's the Almighty every second who's giving us life, every second that we're alive, it's because God is giving, we're ticking, we're living because God is giving us life every second. And he's constantly protecting us. And he's the Almighty and all compassionate. And every punishment and every reward, everything good and everything, God forbid, that seems bad, everything is from God. That the world doesn't implode and the billions of DNA and everything's working like clockwork, it's because God is constantly supervising and controlling the world. That's the Jewish belief. So it's God's will that we should be dispersed amongst the nations, and God strictly forbade the Jewish people of creating our own sovereignty, or what you would call a safe haven, because it's not a safe haven, because God is our safe haven. And he said that we are not to reestablish it, and he wants us dispersed amongst the nations. Some of the rabbis, like a Rabbi Samson Hirsch of German Jewry around 300 odd years ago, he was one of the fighters against the reform movement. He said, God is perfect. A king has to punish somebody who rebelled against him, and he declares and he gives out a decree that he has to be hanged. Now, when he does that, that person who he kills, who he hangs, maybe he has a wife and children, and they can be very fine and loyal people to the king, but he can't control that. He's a human being. He has his, he has his shortcomings as a human being. So he hangs this person, and the whole family suffers, but he can't do anything about it. That's his limitations because he's human. But God is a King of kings, and God has no limitations. So everything is exacting. He wants us dispersed amongst the nation as a bitter medicine that we should be humbled. But at the same time, he wants us dispersed amongst the nations in order that ideally, if we are practicing our religion properly, then we will be a light unto the nations. In other words, people will be able to look at a Jew and say, see, that is how you have to do to be a godly person. Not to keep the laws of the Torah of Shabbos, Sabbath, or kosher, but to see what it means to be good. It says, Mahu rachma v'ataterach. Just as God is compassionate, you should be compassionate. We're supposed to emulate God and do good. So God wants, at the same time, it's a punishment, but it's at the same time, it had a dual purpose. It was God wanted us dispersed amongst the nations, that people should learn of how to be a godly people if we're practicing properly. So that is what the purpose of that's what this rabbi writes. That's the purpose of our being dispersed amongst the nations. Now, God is totally compassionate. He sees our suffering, and he understands what we're going through much more than we. Just like a mother sees a baby cries, she has more pains than the child has the pain when she sees him cry. God sees our suffering, but he's compassionate, and therefore he gives us that we should be able to live, and he always makes certain that we have a place to go to. We don't understand Hitler, we don't understand many things. We have to be introspective and try to understand where it comes from, but basically we don't question God's compassion, and we don't so everything is from God. If there's a tsunami, if there's a plague, there's nothing that just happened. There's a reason for everything.
The Jewish people living in Western countries, for example, the UK and America, according to the Torah, can they own their own home, their own piece of land, a single-family home? Is that allowed?
Yes, we're allowed to do that. We're allowed to own land. And also, you were asking about the people living, which I didn't answer before you asked the question. As individuals, when God sent us into exile, we are not permitted to return en masse as a nation, to create a nation. But as individuals, there was never a decree of God that we shouldn't be able to exist under other nations. So, for instance, the last couple of 100 years, it was under the Ottoman Empire, and they were gracious enough to allow the Jews to live amongst them as under their rule. So that is as subjects under their rule. So that is permitted for us. So we're permitted to live under other nations, and in fact, we're required to pray for the well-being of the other nations wherever we're residing. So Jews did live lived in every Arab and Muslim country, and including in Palestine. Not only that they lived in Palestine, but the Holy Land never lost its holiness. So it is a very holy land. And in fact, rabbis who would be living throughout the world, whether it be Russia or Baghdad or in Iraq or wherever it may be, the US, many rabbis, when they retired, they decided to live off their last years, and they would take a few students and go to the Holy Land to live off their last years in holiness. So it became a gathering place for the very elite, very special Ivy League of Judaism would live there. Many people didn't go there because they even felt they're not on that. They were reluctant to go because they felt they're not on that level of holiness that would allow them to live there. That wouldn't be against the will of God. But some rabbis went there, and through the years, it became a place of the most Ivy League, of the most God-fearing Jewish community throughout the world, and they were supported. They were a very poor community, and they were supported by the Jewish communities around the world. There was very special charities to support this holy community in the Holy Land. So this community living there were very God-fearing. They were not Zionists. When the Zionists developed, these were people who understood they're there not to establish a state. They're there simply to serve God, and they lived in the same courtyards with the Muslim community, with the Arab community, and I have many people who are living amongst us in our Jewish communities here, our children and grandchildren of this community. We show pictures how they live together in total harmony, because we were not aspiring or not trying to take the land away from the Palestinian people. And the Palestinian people knew that. We were never a danger to them. We were very God-fearing people, and we helped each other. The Jews, Muslims helped the Jews.
That brings me to my next question. Israel, and I want you to educate me, why Israel has been dehumanizing Arabs or Palestinians, the people of Gaza and the West Bank, for so long, and the way Israel treats those people, it's in very inhumane conditions. For example, right now, October 7th was a very horrific attack, but in response, Israel has killed 40,000 civilians by some estimates, many of them children. So my question is, one, what do you think about that? And my second question is, if Israel, if that was not the way Israel was treating Palestinians, if Israel was peacefully coexisting with Palestinian people, the people in Gaza and the West Bank, peacefully, everyone have the same rights, would that such an Israel, would that be acceptable to you?
Okay, with God's help, the questions are terrific, mind you. It touches the points, the basic, really, that one has to know to understand the conflict, what's happening. So again, we are, as a nation, we are forbidden to live there. As a nation, to establish a Jewish nation in the Holy Land. That would not be acceptable. We shouldn't be gathering in large numbers to return to the Holy Land. Now, so as individuals, we had been able to live there and coexist in total peace, as we did. It was a fact prior to the advent of Zionism. Now, being that there was this mass migration back to the Holy Land, how it should be dealt with according to the Torah, because it was, it breached the laws of the Torah to return in such large numbers, is a question. But one is a question how it should be dealt with once we remove, first of all, this illegal occupation, the illegal control over the Holy Land. So that's the first thing, is certainly that the state of Israel, their control over the Holy Land, that is unacceptable in any shape or form according to the Torah. So that has to be removed. What should happen to the Jewish people living there? How we could coexist? So I mean, it would be, if that's a question, that's a theoretical question, because we're not holding there. But if that time would come, then we would have to, the rabbis would have to sit down. I mean, with the permission of the Palestinian people, if they would be gracious enough that we could coexist with them, which they most probably would not have a problem if they would be given full rights and so forth and control over the land, then we would have to discuss about how we could coexist and be able to live as a people, whether it's permissible according to the Torah, and if we could coexist. But that's a question in the future. But now, let me just regress a little bit. I mentioned that the Torah is subservience to God. Zionism is a transformation to nationalism, and it's totally a different concept at all. It's contradictory. So, and also I mentioned that we're on the oath of God, that we are not permitted. Once we were sent into exile, we're not allowed to return en masse. We're not allowed to rebel against nations, and we're not allowed to try to end the exile. So the establishment of the state of Israel is expressly forbidden for the Jewish people, even if it would not be like this false Israel. In other words, Israel is simply a nationalism created by non-religious Jews. It's a whole, they're not interested in God. But even if it would be Moshe Rabbeinu, people like that, would, very holy people, I'm giving an example, and they would say, we want to establish a Jewish state. No, that's forbidden because we're in exile. So, and that would be forbidden not only in the Holy Land, it's forbidden any place around the world. Even 1 centimeter, 1 inch would be forbidden for us to establish a land, even in an uninhabited land. In other words, if they would like to buy some island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean and establish a Jewish homeland, that is forbidden for Jews. We are in exile. God said, do not re-establish a Jewish nationalism. The fact that the Zionists went and they decided to create their state in Palestine, so with that, they're breaching many laws. Not only the 3 oaths that you're not allowed to return en masse, and you're not allowed to rebel against nations, and you're not, so and of course they're trying to establish a Jewish nation. So that's all breaching the laws of exile. But on top of that, they're creating it by killing and stealing, because it wasn't an empty land; it was inhabited by other people. So in order to reach their goal of establishing this so-called Jewish state, it entails killing and stealing, and exiling people from the land. So this is just, besides the 3 oaths, it's the basics of Judaism that you're not allowed to kill or steal. So it's in every facet. Zionism is totally contradictory to Judaism in every way you look at it. But on top of that, let me just one more thing. the Muslim countries, as I mentioned before, the Muslims embraced the Jewish people when we went through the Inquisition and the Crusades. It was the Muslim and Arab countries that took the Jews in, and we flourished for hundreds of years amongst the Muslim countries. We put out our greatest rabbis. And in the Ottoman Empire, which was in Palestine, which had its Palestine was part of the Ottoman Empire, and they had and the Jews lived there amongst them, and they flourished. We had our greatest, as I said, we had the Ivy League of Judaism there. We had so many great scholars and holy men. So we are required by God to show gratefulness to people who did kindness to us, who took us in and embraced us. So on top of all the prohibitions about creating a state and not to steal, not to kill, they're simply repaying good with bad. And because instead of saying to the world and saying we are so grateful to you and we should be giving you rewards for the good you've done to us, they are vilifying the people of Palestine and the Muslims entirely and saying, oh, they hate the Jews. There's a religious conflict here, and the reason they don't want the establishment of the state of Israel, it's because they hate Jews. And they make a narrative that they're a bunch of victims and the villains are the people of Palestine. But the reason they did this simply it's because they needed a story, they needed a narrative to tell the world what is happening, why are people opposing their establishment of their homeland. So what are they going to say? All of a sudden people are coming and fighting with them, and so they're going to say they're fighting with them. What's going on? People ask them. Remember, this is way before the smartphones, before internet, and people were just hearing the little news from a few very limited few news outlets, and they couldn't say we're stealing the land, that there were over 500 villages that were destroyed. So with Der Yassin, right, and all these villages. So they said, oh, they're just a bunch of camel riding backward people who have a big empty land here, and they simply do not they don't accept any people who are not their religion, so they hate Jews, and they're just continuing from the Nazis. They're just bad people. So that's the reason why they vilify the people of Palestine, because they had to fit into their story why there's people opposing their establishment of a state. They simply had to do that. So I'm sure if the Palestinians would be living in Guatemala, in some other part of the world, they wouldn't be talking about the Palestinians, and they wouldn't care what happens with the Palestinians. But they have a problem. They had a technical problem that the Palestinians didn't want the homes taken away from them. So they had to tell the world to justify why they're occupying these people. So they have to vilify them. They say, oh, they're just bad people who hate the fact that there's Jews here. And it fell very well into the history that just happened, the terrible Holocaust, that people were murdered people were evil who were anti-Semitic, and they killed Jews because they were Jews. My grandparents were killed in Auschwitz. My father escaped when the Nazis came into Hungary, and he turned around when he got left and he was able to get out of Hungary, and he tried to make passports, whatever, to save my grandparents, his parents. But they didn't permit them to leave. They closed the doors. The Nazis wanted to eradicate the Jews. They wanted to kill every Jew. The Jews couldn't escape. Why? Because they said they're against Jews. They want to eradicate people. They were anti-Semites. So the Zionists, and the world was silent. The world did not let Jews come into them, and the world felt guilty. And there was a guilt feeling around the world afterwards that they were silent. They let over 6 million people be murdered. Besides the other people that were talking about, all the Jews that were like the majority of Jews were killed there. So they turned around. Now they were able to use this story as a weapon and say to the world, oh yeah, these Muslims, they work the people of Palestine, they work together with the Nazis, and they're just continuing on with the Nazis. So the world felt very bad. The world feels that they didn't do enough for the Jews, and they're sympathetic with the Jewish plight, and therefore they feel that they support them. That's exactly what Zionism has. So Zionism has two weapons. One weapon is they use the Torah. They count on the world ignorance of the Torah, that the children of Israel have to go to the land of Israel. Christians respect that. And they tell the world, oh, this is the land that God gave us, ignoring totally our teaching of the Torah that all the rabbis teach us, that we're in exile and then now we're forbidden to create a Jewish state. But they know the world doesn't know about that and doesn't really care what Jewish people teach in their schools. So they count on the world's support, Christian support, for their creation of the state, and that when Palestinian people come and they say, hey, give me back the land, they say, wait, it's not your land. Here, they wave the Bible. They say, this is the land God gave us. You're a bunch of thieves. And then when the people complain and so they add on to that, they say, whoever decides to be sympathetic and speak up for the Palestinians, say, you're an anti-Semite. So they have the weapon of the Torah is one weapon, one lethal weapon, and the second lethal weapon, which they're using till today, right now, as you see it just getting worse and worse, is the attack of accusation of anti-Semitism, that you're against Jews because they're Jews. That is a terrible accusation. Now, and
let me ask you this. Was there something in Zionism that led Zionist leaders to pick Israel as the land which they will make home? Why couldn't they go to a place in Africa or in Asia, where there would be 10 times less conflict?
Right. Yeah. Again, the questions are terrific. They did want to go. In fact, the first thoughts, which is very clear in the Zionist writings, they wanted to go to Uganda and create a state. They wanted to go to it was before computers, before technology. The world existed on productivity of the land, the richness of the soil. So they wanted to go to Patagonia. In fact, there's an area next to Brazil, and next to Argentina. There's a land. They even have Jewish people that settled there. They wanted to make a Jewish homeland over there in a very lush land called Patagonia. And they were going to create a Jewish state. And they had a few other, even in Rochester, it happens to be in upstate New York, and they had a few plans where to go. And they were going to establish a land there. But then they had these meetings, and one of them was in Basel, Switzerland in 1890s, where they decided to create a land. It's not like a small endeavor and small undertaking. It's a massive undertaking, and you need a massive amount of support. So they decided if they'll go and establish their state in Palestine, then they'll be able to buy the hearts of all the Christians, the evangelistic Christians, which till today, you have more Christians who are supportive of the state of Israel than Jews. The millions and millions of Christians, they look in the Bible, the Old Testament says the children of Israel have to go to the land of Israel, and you support that, you help that, you'll be blessed. And many Christians say they feel they're blessed. They say it all the time. They're blessed by helping the children of Israel return to the land of Israel. So they use this emotions, this belief in the Torah that people have, and now knowingly that these people will not know the laws of the Torah, or maybe they won't even care what the Jewish people say that our laws are, and they simply use the Christianity and so forth to get this massive support. One, and then there's the Jewish people who, unfortunately, as I said, were mostly reform already. They were non-religious Jews around the world, and they're simply following their emotions. Their Judaism is not according to the laws of the Torah. They do whatever is convenient for them. So they decided they'll play on their emotions. That the Jews say we suffered so many years, 2,000 years, and the Zionists, and they have play constant advertisements where they say they play this emotional music and say 2,000 years we wandered, we were in exile, and now God gave us back the land. So the people, everybody, every Jew has some ceremonies, so even if they're not practicing Jews, but one of the ceremonies they do, for instance, is the Passover, and they make the Seder, it's called, where at the end of the ceremony they say the coming year in Jerusalem. That's how we end the ceremony, with the coming year in Jerusalem. Our children say it, I say it, but we never think at it for one moment that it means that I should buy a ticket and go to Jerusalem. The coming year in Jerusalem means there is the day when God will reveal his glory, where all humanity will serve God, that metaphysical, that miraculous change in the world. But these people, they count on their lack of knowledge of the Torah, and they play on their emotions. They say, the coming year in Jerusalem, it's now. Now is the time, and God gave us back the Holy Land with miracles, and we were able to take the land away from the Arab people, and we're able to get back the land. So they use it, and the leaders of this movement, mind you, are malicious, and they know, a lot of them are knowledgeable in the Torah, but they're sinners, and they just simply rebel against God and the Torah, and they laugh at all the world. We put out books from day one. We put out a book called The Rabbis Speak Out. It's a compilation, 130 years of religious Jewish opposition to Zionism. Zionism is 76, the state of Israel is 76 years. But this movement of Zionism started in Austria, and was, not godless people, and all the rabbis around the world. This compilation of the leading rabbis, the leading authorities.
Let me ask you this question, Rabbi.
Just one second. So they stood up and said, this is unacceptable, that these people are charlatans. They're falsifying the Judaism. It's not Judaism. It's haram. It's unacceptable. And they stood and opposed them before they established the state in Europe. So the Zionist communities were totally ostracized and spit out of the Jewish communities in Europe when they tried to move them, create this movement of Zionism. They only became powerful after Hitler wiped out the Jews, and then they were able to get Britain to give them land, and the United Nations ratified. They became powerful, and then they started dealing out land to people and so forth. So their power came after the Jews lost their leadership in World War II, that they were able to have a hold on the Jewish communities around the world.
Talking about Jewish leadership, currently, like for example, we have Vatican, which is the church for all Catholic Christians, right? That one body. Is there like one single body that speaks for Jews around the world, believing Jews?
It happens to be that we have some rabbinates and very distinguished rabbinates, but it's not we have a pope or something like that. We do have a rabbinate. So in Jerusalem itself, there was, for the Jewish communities, this God-fearing community that was prior to Zionism, had two rabbinates. They had, besides many other distinguished rabbis, but it didn't go on the hierarchy exactly like that of pope. But there is something sort of a manner of like a sort of hierarchy. They had, it's called Neturei, this God-fearing community, where we had the chief rabbi. So in the 1920s, when Zionism was starting, 1910s, the chief rabbi was Rabbi Sonnenfeld of blessed memory, and he met with the king of Transjordan, the emir of Transjordan. He met with him. We have the pictures of it, and he told him clearly that we're not aspiring to create a state. This is the picture of meeting with the king of Transjordan, Rabbi Sonnenfeld. And he wrote in the Arab newspapers that. Then he passed on, and the next chief rabbi of the Neturei, this God-fearing community, that still today there's the Neturei, this God-fearing community, and the chief rabbi was Rabbi Dushinsky. And Rabbi Dushinsky was alive in 1947. That was a year prior to the ratification of the state by the United Nations. And he pleaded with the United Nations. He went and met with the delegation of the United Nations. And again, we have the pictures. It's in the United Nations documents, where this is him, and he's meeting, and he says to the United Nations, and it's the United Nations documents, declaration before the United Nations in July 16, 1947. He said, we furthermore wish to express our definite opposition to a Jewish state in any part of Palestine. Mind you, he's the leader of this community, God-fearing people. And it wasn't somebody who was a sinner. The God-fearing leader of the Jewish community said, we don't want this Jewish state. But the British mandate and then the United Nations totally ignored the will of that Jewish community. And they gave the rights to the Zionists to establish their state and have control over the area. So
Rabbi, let me ask you this. To believing Jews like yourself and other believing Jews, if the name Israel was replaced by the name Palestine, and Jews were allowed to practice their religion freely, now they don't have their own country, they're just living on that same piece of land, but now it's called Palestine. There is no conflict between sort of the people of Gaza and West Bank and the Jews. Would that be acceptable to you?
Yeah, and actually you mentioned that the same question earlier, and you're right. That's what I said. As Jewish community, it would be totally acceptable according to God and according to the Torah. It would have to be, of course, the will of the Palestinian leadership that they should accept us, that we should live amongst. And we are certain I mean, because if they would say that it can't be done this way, then we wouldn't be able to do it. But we are quite certain that because I've had my experience, I've gone and I met with Hezbollah, with Hamas, and with the PLO. We met with them, and we had when they made the PLO Palestinian Authority, Yasser Arafat, we had a representative in their authority here. His name was Rabbi Moshe Hirsch. And he lived in Jerusalem. The Zionists poured acid in his face. He was blind in one eye and barely able to see from the other. But we had our communities was very friendly and very, totally connected and sympathetic with the Palestinian Authority and the Palestinian people. Then further, when there was elections and it was Gaza, so Ismail Haniyeh, who was just assassinated, he was the prime minister. We went there. We brought medical aid to them, and he embraced us. And he said, Ismail Haniyeh, we are not against Jews. We want to live together. That's what they all said. We went to the Hezbollah. They also said we're not against, and they did this. They didn't say it privately. They said this in a big gatherings, thousands of people. They had met with us, and they said we are not against Jews. We want to live, but we want to free Palestine. So that would not be a problem. Now, I told you that there is a law that while we're in exile, we're not to return en masse. It would be a rabbinical question that the rabbis will have to sit down and discuss what to do, being that it was transgressed and they went there as a large number, how we deal with this problem. When that day comes, we'll deal with it. In other words, what the laws are, what is required. But technically, as Jews, we can live together with the Palestinians, and that's exactly what we want. And regardless, the Palestinians should pick out what type of, if they want a democracy, if they want their leadership according to a religious leadership, whatever they want. In other words, they would have the right as a Palestine, just like it was under the Ottoman Empire, it will be under the Palestinian people. That is what our rabbis want, and that is what we're looking forward to.
When I met you in Manhattan a few weeks ago, you used the word satanic alongside the creation of the state of Israel. Why did you use that word? Can you describe that?
Yes, because first of all, that the Jewish people should go and rebel against God in so many ways the Jewish people know to be a Jew. We knew for 2,000 years, although we went through so much struggle, so much suffering, and they tried to forcefully convert us by the Inquisition and Crusades, and we died for God. They were burnt at the stake, they were tortured, and we knew what it meant to be a Jew is to serve God, to follow the Torah. And all of a sudden, this movement comes along, and it becomes so popular among so many people, and they're able to uproot Jews from their belief in God, and people who are survivors from the Holocaust that went through, they were almost dead. The small children who are more vibrant, they were able to survive, and they took these little children out of Morocco and out of different places who were survivors of the Holocaust, who came from the camps, from the refugee camps and the concentration camps originally, and they took them and they right away put them into their internment camps, their kibbutzim and stuff like that, and they totally eradicated. Instead of saying to them, we're trying to convert you or so forth. No, so they did it with a candy instead of with a stick. They said, you're being a fine Jew, and just you don't just have to serve God. It's a democracy now. So it's that's one level of Satanism. It's a Satan that's totally what we died for. We gave our lives for, and all of a sudden, just one snap of a finger with a smile, they're totally uprooting them from God. So they totally destroying what Judaism is. But on top of that, the satanic is because you see that the whole United Nations was created in order that there should be a way of resolving conflicts in the world without blood. That there was 2 world wars where millions and millions of people died for no reason. I mean, it was just, they died. They were murdered because of some type of small conflict, and it became a worldwide issue. So the world decided they'll get together, they'll create a United Nations where they'll be able to adjudicate and solve world problems by sitting at a table and solving the issues peacefully. So that was the creation of the state. And one of the first things they did was the ratification of the state of Israel. And if anybody with common sense, with the IQ of a child, you'll ask, now you take you took a land where people are living there, Muslims, very religious Muslims, very religious Christians. Like I said, the people who go to the Holy Land usually were people who are very devout practitioners of their religion. So you have the Muslims, you have and the Jews amongst them, and all of a sudden you're going to declare that from this section of the land is called Israel. It's under the Jewish people. You're asking that people will become subject to another religion, even though it's not their religion, and you're asking that there should be contention, that there should be hate, that there should be bloodshed. How does the United Nations come along and establish in this land that was the, and it's not that it would never conflict before on the world, so we know what could happen, and you're giving a stamp and you're creating bloodshed. So, and wait, more than that, they took this piece and they're creating a land where the majority of people living in Palestine and in Jerusalem were Muslims. The second largest community were Christians. The smallest of the three communities were Jews. And here you're going to call it the state of Israel, that this minority should have control over the majority. It's the most illogical, the most terrible crime to do when you're doing that. And they did it. But not only was the fact that they gave it to the Jews, but they didn't even give it to the Jews truly, because as I mentioned, the Jewish community living there for these hundreds of years, they weren't the ones who wanted it. It was against them also. So is it not satanic? And that this body of world body should go and it should become ratified and accepted. It's only because it's not logical, it's not human, it's the works of Satan. And if you will carry that on till today, you've had 76 years of pure blood. Sometimes it trickles, sometimes it flows. You had rivers of blood, 76 years of oppression of the Palestinian people, where they're begging and trying to get their rights. Every year they go in the United Nations and they make this serious day for Palestine, where they'll declare that resolutions and declarations that the people of Palestine should have the right to return to their homes and so forth. It's just a bunch of wallpaper, nothing. And this is what we're facing. And so it's 76 years that the world is silent to injustice, and injustice to the Jewish people. The Jewish people that was there from day one, as I mentioned, said that they're against the state. And when he passed on afterwards, they took up another chief rabbi. You have tens of thousands of Jews who are living in Jerusalem, who took up, these are all anti-Zionists living there. They're living there, that community. And besides which, around the world, you have tens and hundreds of thousands of Jews who are anti-Zionist. The people, and we have demonstrations around the world, but even there, you have people, that boys and girls who become 17 are required, is mandatory military service in Israel. And if you don't go to the army, you're a criminal. So they get arrested. Boys and girls get arrested because they refuse to serve in the army. You see old men, children, young children. Here, young children, babies almost, and old men get beaten by not only beaten, but assassinated. And this goes in 76 years. Just bear with me a second. I want to show 76 years. It's the army. It's not just police. And we never carry guns. We never carry knives. In 76 years, you won't hear stories that our community ever killed anybody. And yet they get brutally beaten, arrested, assassinated. Our rabbis trodden on with horses, with cars, sprayed with stink water, it's called, this chemicals that destroys their clothes. You've heard about it. They did in Columbia University now. But this happens for years with impunity. And this is, and so basically, this is, the world is silent. The world doesn't even speak about this. We are oppressed, the Jewish community living under them, under the Zionist control. If it would happen in the United States once, everybody would be yelling anti-Semitism, and Netanyahu would be running here and requiring restitution for Israel because they beat some Jew over here. So this is happening. So I'm saying you can see it's satanic because the world is silent and doesn't say anything. And it culminated in October 7th, where you have, first of all, that there's 40,000 people officially already, and there's, of course, most probably it's closer to 100,000. There's people under the rubble and who knows what, and people are dying from heart attacks and are dying because of the injuries and so forth and so on. It's because with every bomb that there's one person killed, statistically, I don't know how many more are injured, right? So we're talking about unbelievable amount of death and suffering, and the world sees this and they're silent. Is it not satanic?
You're absolutely right that the world is silent. And I believe the reason that the world is silent is primarily because the mainstream liberal media in this country, talking about America, because we're both in America, the mainstream liberal media has created an image of Muslims. They dehumanize Muslims all the time, number one. They dehumanize even Orthodox Jews. Unfortunately, the mainstream liberal media is very much against anyone who believes in God, in my opinion. And what I believe now is they have created a situation where a nuclear strike on a Muslim country, for example, would be accepted to most people in the Western world. The people who talk about freedom and human rights and democracy and all that, the mainstream liberal media has created this image of Muslims where a nuclear strike wiping out hundreds of thousands of Muslims would be accepted. And I fear it could happen between Israel attacking one of the neighboring countries. People like Yuval Noah Harari, that writer, he's an atheist himself. He clearly says that Israel could use nuclear weapons to protect itself. What do you say about that?
Well, with God's yes, that we are. I totally agree that because people have hearts, the people are a lot of people are good, very well-meaning and goodwill, and they want to stand up for what's right. So the question, like you say, it's just bewildering. Why are they silent at this massacre, this genocide, this murder? How come they're so silent? So again, because and if you think about it, it's because 76 years the Zionists had the mic in their hands, and they kept on narrating that the Palestinian people, as I said, that the reason they oppose the state of Israel is because they hate Jews. So they made them into Nazis. Now nobody would have qualms about bombing and killing all the Nazis on the world, right? If Nazis, if you would see Hitler on the street, everybody would dance if they would kill him, and right, everybody would be happy. And so they simply labeled and inculcated in the minds of people for 76 years. Every time they reported a story, what happens in Palestine, they made it a one-sided story. The terrorist Palestinians, the Intifada, the terrorist Palestinians, that they're coming, not that they're trying to get their freedom or anything. And, you know, we're not talking about I'm not getting into the concept of, you know, that it should be done, you know, killing people and indiscriminately killing people. I'm not getting into that, but the concept of it is that they're constantly portraying the settlers and all these people like these innocent, you know, just good-hearted people who were making their peaceful lives in a little area, and all of a sudden they're attacked by the Palestinian people. So they vilified them till they dehumanized the people of Palestine. It's like you would take a plane and you go over a field, and in order that the wheat should not get eaten up, you spray it and you kill all the worms. So somebody going to yell at you that you are doing something wrong, that you're killing the worms, that you're a murderer? No, that you're doing a good thing because you want to have the wheat should grow. That is what they did. They're making them into cockroaches, into worms, that something, ants, mosquitoes, that has to be eradicated. They put it so deep into the minds. They did it so deep into the minds of humanity that they don't feel anymore that there's a problem with the murder. A little bit, it's bothering, but somehow or other they're able to swallow it because they've been so inculcated, as I say, programmed, that they dehumanize the people of Palestine. And
the fact that there's a lot of reporting that Israel at least helped Hamas to grow. Israel was helpful in the creation of Hamas so that it can be a front against Palestine Liberation Organization.
Yeah, I mean, I won't get into the fact that many people are saying it's quite clear that Israel was warned about that they're going to attack, and it seemed that they wanted some provocation in order that they should be able to carry out a sort of. We're not going to get into these theories and these things. It's just what it is. What something that's there. You don't have to. Nobody could refute that killing, mass murder of a whole people, and how. Except one thing, because people will say it's not a people. They're worms. That's what it is. So that's why the world is buying. So that's satanic. And it's satanic on so many levels, like I say, because it's not Judaism. They're using a religion to cover for this. They claim and they yell anti-Semitism. How many thousands and thousands of Jews are out there demonstrating in the streets of Jerusalem, my brothers and sisters, and how many thousands and thousands, that never gets covered in the news, and how many thousands and thousands in the US that you do see because they can't ignore it. In Congress, there was Jewish people got up there and wherever, and then the students on universities, and they're yelling, it's not Jewish. It's not Jewish. So they throw them out. They suspend them in the universities, and the ones who are not Jewish, they call them anti-Semitic, and they even try to call the Jews anti-Semites and so forth. So they're using the attack of anti-Semitism. Now let me just a little expand on that anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism, we have three issues here in anti-Semitism. First of all, the insult of using the word it's anti-Semitic, what they're doing, is first of all, my grandparents died because they were Jews. Hitler killed them. My grandparents were older people when my father ran away. And they took these two older people. I have a picture of them before they were led away, a person with a white beard. They were old people. Of course, they were no danger. They were God-fearing, quiet, holy people. And they took them and they burnt them, put them in the gas chambers. They gassed them, they killed them, and then they burnt them. So they died because they were Jews. That is anti-Semitism. When somebody comes along and commits crimes, such inhumanity, such horrific, indescribable crimes, and when you say something to them, you say you're an anti-Semite, you are cheapening the whole word of anti-Semitism. You made it worthless, and if therefore it's sort of a holy thing, the word anti-Semitism. So it means, because in other words, it's like racism. If somebody will now come along and do and I'll say to them, that person could be he's acting anti-Semitic, or he starts saying Jew to, so somebody will laugh at me. He says, what is that word anti-Semite? It's nothing. They're watering it down that it has no value anymore. So that's like racism. You're going to take away the value of the word racism. Apartheid went on for so many years, and they were able to practice it. And in America, they were able to practice blacks, again, racism. And today, thank God, it was, I'm not going to say eradicated, but it was stopped officially, right? And now you can't discriminate officially. Now, if you're going to do crimes, black people, and they're going to do it and say, you can't do anything back to me because I'm black, and therefore you can kill and steal. And if you say anything, they're going to say, because you're a racist, and then courts, they're going to give them right for that. They're going to water down the whole word of racism. The same thing with anti-Semitism. They're devaluing what my grandparents' is ashes. They're making it into nothing. It's unacceptable. This is what they're doing with race. And altogether, they are anti-Semitic. These Zionists are the personification of anti-Semitism, because they're murderers, they're killing people. I mean, I don't want to get into semantics, but they're Semites, and who they're killing. And so, secondly, because the Palestinians are all, Arabs are also Semites. Beside that all, they're killing people. But they're not only they're killing people, but they're exacerbating anti-Semitism. When I go around the world and people see me as a Jew, there are people who are angry at me because they think, on the contrary, the more the religious.
I want to ask this question. There is a lot of anti-Semitism in the Muslim world. Let's just talk my country, my native Pakistan, where I was born. You could get killed just walking down the street if you are wearing your traditional clothing.
Why?
That's the question. Like, I want to ask, what would be your message to those people?
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. That's what I was saying, because Zionism is the exacerbator of anti-Semitism. They're the ones who cause hate of Jews. Pakistanis didn't have against Jews. The Pashtuns It happens to be comes from Jews, as far as we know. I've met many Pashtuns, and they have names and they have customs, and they come from hundreds of years ago. They came from Jews even. They have their customs. They say they come from the tribes, Jewish tribes that were exiled there. So they don't have against Jews. Years and years ago, I went with people from the Pashtuns and from other tribes, and they were not against Jews, totally not against Jews. The problem is because Zionism comes along, they take the land, they occupy another people, and they murder and they oppress and oppress and oppress for 76 years, and especially now these last 10 months. So people look at a Jew and the blood goes into their head when they see a Jew, because they say, you're standing there and you're smiling and you're going about your day while your brothers and you're condoning and supporting the killing of the Palestinian people. So they get angry because they think we are the supporters of this. And because the more the religious people think, the more you're supporting. Netanyahu's support is from the extreme right, they say. So who pays for the Zionist selfish goal of establishing and solidifying their state? We religious Jews, not Netanyahu, who walks around without a kippah, without covering his head. You don't even see these guys are Jewish. We religious Jews who are the ones who have to pay for their crime. So they are the most anti-Semitic, anti-Semitist that can be, these Zionists. They're personification. Yet they charge everybody with anti-Semitism. My message to the Pashtuns, my message to the people of Pakistan, I plead with them that understand this has nothing, it's Satan. It's nothing to do with Judaism. In Islam, you know that you have people who also abuse the religion. People know what that means. So they are taking my religion, and as the rabbis from day one around the world, every single Torah authority said, this is criminal, this is false, it's blasphemy, it's heresy. So we are standing and pleading with the people of the world, understand that we are crying and hurting with the people of Palestine, and we demonstrate for the people of Palestine. Do not accuse us and do not equate us with the Zionists, but be careful, don't call it a Jewish state. We tell the people of Pakistan, we tell the people of Palestine, don't call it the Jews or the Jewish state, because you're playing right into the hands of the Zionists, that they're able to accuse you of being anti-Semitic. So that's what we tell people. It's just ironic, the whole state of Israel, I didn't mention before, is if you would ask a Zionist, why do you need a state? They say, we need a safe haven. Right? So you say, God is our safe haven. God is the one who protects us. Where was God by the Holocaust? So it's rooted, and maybe I did mention, it's rooted in blasphemy and heresy. They don't look to God. They laugh at God. They scorn at the power of God. They have a ersatz Judaism. It's a false Judaism. They're masquerading under the facade of Judaism, but it's not Judaism. It's part of the Nakba, this terrible catastrophe that we are living.
I hope that people watching this in Israel and people watching this anywhere in the Muslim world, especially in Pakistan, because I'm from Pakistan, I feel for my people. I hope we can at least agree that the killing of innocent people, whether it's Israel killing innocent civilians in Palestine, it's Hamas killing innocent Israelis for what, irrespective of the reason, or it's radical elements within the Muslim world killing Muslims and people of other religions, irrespective of their beliefs. I hope that from this conversation, people can understand that that is absolutely unacceptable. You cannot kill an innocent human being. We can leave it at that, Rabbi. Do you have any other messages to share?
Even that October 7th that they spoke about, that so many people were killed, first of all, a lot of it was lies of the Zionists. But that shock of what happened people should say, enough, I gave you 76 years. You went through the intifadas, you went through so much. So if people are dying, why are they dying? It's like the Secretary General of the United States didn't come out of a vacuum, and they wanted to fire. They should fire him. It's not. It's simply for one reason and one reason only, because they made an occupation. The people, it's like an insult to common sense, to the logic, to the IQ of a normal human being, that your people are ignoring Why is this happening? And they keep on just just hammering down and insisting that it's because you're anti-Semitic because of this. It's so illogical. People who live with Jews, who love Jews, who are Jews, are opposing this. Yet you're accusing them anti-Semitic because they're standing against a crime, against a horrific genocide. And when it happens, a murder, that it should be a shock that should make you think, I gave you 76 years, that you should see, you said you have, that's going to bring peace, the establishment. You see what it brings. You can't oppress a people. It hurts people die, but they're being killed. And not only the people in that October 7th, but if you go to the graves of the soldiers of Israel, how many of them were killed? We have thousands and tens of thousands who died for 76 years. They died because of a religion? They died because of a good purpose? No, because they wanted to implement an occupation. So Zionism is their hands are covered in blood. Remove this flawed, selfish, nationalist movement that's a mere 100-odd years. It's a stupid movement that started 100-odd years ago. Apartheid was recognized by the United Nations, by this beautiful, distinguished body, United Nations, and they called themselves the ambassadors, His Excellency this, His Excellency that. They kept them in the most distinguished position, and anybody who dared speak up against them was a terrorist. Nelson Mandela said 27 years in prison, over 27 years. Today, because of the grassroots, because people like you, like me, we stood and we just didn't allow them that comfort, and the politicians were forced to change their position. Today, apartheid ended. Everybody today will agree that racism and apartheid is criminal, it's unacceptable. But for so many years, they were the legitimate representation of South Africa. And now that it's stopped, nobody would dare create a country with apartheid. The same thing is with Israel. It is possible that the United Nations should ratify a state that is totally criminal and unacceptable. And that is what we're living the state of Israel. It is satanic that the world accepts it. It will end because God, the Almighty, is compassionate, and He will pray, and we urge everybody to pray that He should bring a speedy and total removal of this impediment to peace, this Zionist rebellion against God, the Zionist state of Israel. Then we will be able to live together in peace and harmony. But till that day comes, we plead with people, don't be intimidated. It's not anti-Semitic. Speak up. Do what you can for the people of Palestine. And we hope, inshallah, one day we should see we should be blessed and to see this free Palestine. And people of Palestine, give the message to the people of Gaza, people, that Jews around the world, we are crying and hurting with them. Tens and hundreds of thousands in Palestine and around the world. Not that many are vocal, because over there they're brutally beaten and arrested and assassinated. Around the world, we are also beaten and harassed. Death threats and so forth, we constantly are harassed, and therefore many people are afraid to speak up. If it wouldn't be for that, you would hear so much more people's voices, both of the Jewish community and others. But it is what it is. But at least know that we are with you, we're crying with you, people of Gaza. Inshallah, free Palestine.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. Thank you so much for joining me.